Happy Friday. So today we're going to talk about lithium ion battery recycling fires. Lithium ion battery recycling. This is my attempt at, So what happens in recycling is that there is a high chance of fires. It's not necessarily how it's going to happen, it's when. At some point in their process, you're going to deal with thermal events. So this is something that we deal with on an ongoing basis when we're designing plants for recycling batteries and we're putting plants together. So the number one thing that causes fires is, believe it or not, aluminum. So we do get a lot of people that think that, okay, there's a solvent in, and yes, the solvent is flammable, explosive, and then you have the energy. Most of the batteries that go through the system are already discharged or are already waste batteries. They have less energy stored in them, and because of that, we don't deal with as much of a chance of fire with that. Now, there's a few different ways. I'm going to erase this beautiful drawing from the board here. So we oftentimes will go with either a wet and it can be an oxygen depleted system that shreds the material, or it can be completely dry. So there's a few different things that matter here. So are you shredding production scrap? So we're gonna go production scrap. If you're shredding production scrap, there's less of a chance for fire, talking about the solvents, because there's no solvent in the production scrap. The production scrap is just jelly rolls, cathode, anode, that type of material from making batteries. So if you're making brand new batteries and you're getting a lot of the machines that we've done early on were for this, because what ends up happening is these companies are making a bunch of batteries. There's a bunch of battery scrap. There's actually a tremendous amount of battery scrap that gets generated from making batteries. It doesn't qualify, it doesn't meet the specs needed, whatever, and you end up with a tremendous amount of production scrap. So these lines here can be done dry. So you can run this material through the system dry. If you're doing cathode, you might want to have some way of either cooling or and the cathode is the part that has aluminum, either cooling or doing it in a nitrogen or oxygen depleted environment. Cooling is actually more important, and we'll go over that later. So now, if we are doing regular post-consumer batteries, right? So you have an EV vehicle, or you have batteries from bicycles that you are recycling. At this point here, you now have a battery that has the liquid in it. You have a chance of, once it gets pierced, once it gets poked, you could start having an explosion, a small explosion, or a thermic event. So what happens with this here is we're gonna shred this in an oxygen depleted environment or a wet environment, or both. And in some of the systems that we've done it with both. Now, going back to production scrap and aluminum, as we discussed earlier. Aluminum, real quick story. One of my customers, this is way before we ever did anything with batteries. One of my customers was doing aluminum, shredding aluminum, and he had this big hammer mill shredder. And a door, like it was a screen door, fell in the mill just the right way, and the door went on the bottom side of the rotor on the screen. Now he kept running, he didn't realize it right away, he kept running. What ended up happening was now new material that was going into the mill could not fall through that screen. So the material just got hot and hot and hot, and eventually it just created a bunch of aluminum dust in there, and it created what's called a thermite reaction, because the aluminum, once it oxidizes and gets to a certain point, kaboom, it needs a lot of temperature, it needs high temperatures to reach it, but once it reaches there, everything burns. And it blew the top off his shredder, and it blew a hole through the roof of his building. Now, I don't know if you know, but these hammer mills, these are incredibly well-built, strong machines with steel plates everywhere. It's not something, they're like an armored car in themselves. So for this whole top to explode is like incredible. So when you're doing production scrap, dry production scrap, and you have a lot of that cathode in there mixed in, that is a cause for concern. Mixed together, not so bad, but if you have the cathode by itself, you have chances for that. And we've certainly seen some thermic events doing that. So anyways, those are the concerns. Now, how do we mitigate these risks when we're running material through the plant? How do we mitigate that? We do it in a few different ways. If we're doing production scrap, we want to make sure that we're monitoring temperature and we're keeping the temperatures cool. If we reach a certain temperature to where that you have a chance for thermal runaway, once you reach that critical temperature, your stuff will catch on. It's not, it might, it will. You're going to have a fire. And we've seen this time and time again where people are running lines and they're setting it up and they're not paying attention to that temperature and there's a thermic event. So that's very important for that. And on the batteries, the post consumer scrap, so batteries coming out of a car, the most important thing is make sure that it's discharged as much as possible. Sure, you can get some cells, you can get some modules that are not fully discharged, and that happens. But if you go ahead and make sure they're as discharged as possible, and you're already lowering the risk. Then you have the other risk, right? So you have the electrolyte that's in the battery. The electrolyte, that is flammable. It's a solvent, it's flammable, so it's a VOC. So you want to make sure that that is either diluted or that you're mitigating that with a low oxygen environment. So the goal of today's video wasn't necessarily to explain to you in detail of how we mitigate the risk and everything. I know this is a way longer conversation. We could be talking about this for half hours or hours. But if you do want to discuss this more, pick up the phone, give me a call. We can go into detail for your application, what type of material you're trying to do. A lot of people want a one-size-fits-all machine that can do everything. That we can do that, but that's not always optimal depending on what you're trying to do. And also fire and explosions being a very real risk in this business. We've seen it time and time again. It's important to make sure that you're talking to someone that understands the risk and how to mitigate those risks, and that you're not going about it haphazardly. I've seen a lot of people doing it not very carefully or not really understanding the dangers, and it's just very, very important that you keep your environment safe, your employees safe, and we can help you do that. So anyways, give me a call and we'll go from there. Happy Friday.